Cassie Tallon, we are so excited to have you here today. We're really honored to have you as a part of a show that we're working with Hu-Friedy Group on. I think you and I are going to have a ton of synergy around efficiencies and systems in a practice. But before we dive into the meat of the conversation, tell me a little bit about your background, how you became the guru of systems and efficiencies in practice.
Yeah, so I work as a fractional COO today with my company, The Fractional Match. I'm pairing fractionals all over the US inside of dental clinics and have just had this pleasure of being able to work alongside clinics and see efficiency grow. And it all originated from helping my father, who was a dentist, and my mom's a hygienist. And they just called me into their clinic as they were looking at an acquisition. And at the time, I was working in more of the hospitality workflow industry and fell in love with dental and have been here ever since. And so out of that practice, selling and being acquired, I joined Partnerships for Dentists, which was a very large DSO. At the time, it was not, but helped them grow to 37 locations from 4, and just had this real pleasure of getting to see what would happen when practices were made more efficient. So it became a lifelong passion of mine from that point forward to say, from here on out, I'm dedicated to dental and helping practices thrive. So I'm excited to be with you today.
So you made me think of two things immediately. The one was actually an Instagram reel I saw today of a doctor who was talking about improving efficiencies in the operating room. They were having a really significant high number of pediatric deaths post cardiovascular surgery, and they were trying to figure out why. And they brought in an F1 formula team because when you think about a pit crew,
Yeah.
the precision and like they 100% depend on systems, because if one person's off, they lose fractions of a second, which costs them a race. And when you said you came into your parents' world from the hospitality and hotel industry, I mean, that resonates so easily to say they do so many things really, really well. Like,
Yeah.
when you think about that coming in from the outside perspective, what were a couple, maybe you have a few keys you were like, they've got it locked on the hospitality side. This is how dentistry should be doing it.
Yeah, well, not many people know this, but my origination was with Johnny Morris in hospitality, who is the owner of Big Cedar Lodge and Bass Pro Shops.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so when you talk about the formula races, actually my first time of working with him was setting up the events for the NASCAR 500, Atlanta 500. And so everything was perfected. There was a checklist for everything. Everything had an order. It ran like clockwork. And even the way the races ran was so efficient. And so what was ironic is coming into the dental space, I started to immediately see all of these crossovers of just missing systems that would make it all work correctly. And the beauty was, because my background was in that hospitality and structured workflow, it just became very easy to see where the inefficiencies were. I had a huge learning curve. I had to learn dental, from the bottom up. But once I started learning it, I'm like, so many things can be implemented that come from other industries where there has been excellence. And that was my heartbeat was, this is about standard of patient care. This is not about, shooting for the stars initially. Let's just raise the bar to the standard. What is the standard that we want to set? And so it was an exciting time to see those crossovers because there are so many.
I want to talk a little bit about checklists. I know that's not going to be 100% about what I talk about today, but every time I bring up the concept of checklists with my team, they're somewhat insulted. And I try to reinforce the concept that I'm not questioning whether you know it or not. It's that's something you don't have to think about. If it's on the checklist, has that been your experience? And then what do you see from an operational efficiency when folks can lean on that checklist instead of having to remember all that stuff?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I noticed right away is I had the opportunity to work with some really incredible consultants, but they were bringing in these giant SOPs, right? Like, follow this list and you'll be productive.
Yeah.
And while it was amazing, I'm like, yeah, but what makes the person actually remember it and do it and follow through? Because in dental, what I've noticed is a lot of times a new idea is launched or a new, plan is launched and it lasts for about 2 weeks. And then we go,
Exactly.
maybe less than 2 weeks. but
Yep.
it's mostly the team trying to decide, like, is anybody going to remember if I actually do this, and does it matter? And so what I started doing right away was implementing task lists per person based on their skill set, evaluating who would be the best person to do this based on what they value and love. Like, I've said this before, the Dave Ramsey of the office, the Dave Ramsey, like, go getter, they're in charge of, making sure that the supplies are ordered within budget, and finding people that have unique skill sets to be ready to go, and then rewarding them. So I do a lot of bonus structures. So when they meet the goals, there's rewards that follow. And when everybody kind of knows what's involved and they're rewarded for it, it seems to really last. But checklists are my go-to. The book Checklist Manifesto was one of the first books
It's
I
a
read.
great book.
Great book.
Yes.
But it's about changing our mindset, right? It's about saying, this isn't about, I have to do this in order to be successful. It's, I'm doing these things because the outcome of them is I feel better about who I am as a person because I'm accomplishing my why. So
Yeah.
you really have to train people in that.
Yeah. And I never really thought about it until one of my teammates verbalized it, that actually she felt like attacked from an IQ perspective. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm not
Yeah.
questioning your ability to do a crown procedure. All I'm saying is that there are definitely 15 things that have to get done. And when we miss one, how does it impact the long-term outcome? Do we
Right.
get paid for the procedure we just did? But
Right.
also, it's clogging up your brain. Like, you can be so much more creative, deal with patient nuances, their anxiety, all that stuff when you're not worried about remembering the next step. So I love that. So you've had experience with both the DSO side and then obviously a little bit on the private practice side. I think you've probably seen both worlds.
I have.
Tell me where they're winning. Like, what could one learn from the other from an efficiency perspective? What are they doing really well? And I know for private practitioners, unveiling the curtain a little bit back on DSOs is really helpful because there are efficiencies and procedures that they could put into place that would make them more profitable. They're not going to get some of the same buying power things that DSOs are going to get, but there definitely are ways that they could streamline themselves for more profitability, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just say, I think one of the things that right away I noticed when I moved into the DSO space is the DSO was very fixated on the numbers. And it was all about achieving that greater EBITDA.
Yeah.
One of the transformative pieces for me was coming in from a private practice view and say, listen, what you need to understand is, yes, you bought this incredible database of patients, but those patients became retained because of the way they were cared for, the way that the doctors provided standard
Exactly.
care. So, like, it's great that you want these goals of, do more, accomplish more crowns. But at the end of the day, we need to look at why the patient stayed in the beginning and retain that, because, my mantra always has been that patients will precede those profits if we get it right from the very beginning. So I think that was a unique learning opportunity with a DSO, was to come alongside and build kind of these legacy transition models where there was preservation of the intangible assets, the things you couldn't see or touch, but you could feel them. And those were the things that we really kind of grew with together. And then from the practice side, one of the things that I see the most, and I still am in a lot of individual private practices today, is I see these doctors that are relinquishing so much control, so much administrative control to the team, that they have little to no pulse on the cash flow and where the money is actually going. And so when I sit down with the doctor, and I was thinking of this when you were talking a minute ago, I had a doctor that when I implemented a checklist with her immediately, like, kind of, this is what I'm seeing. The partner doctors asked me to talk with you about this. She was a rising star associate. She was really angry. She's like, I don't need you to come in and give me a new plan. Like, I know what I'm doing. And I said, actually, what I want you to see is I ran your CDT codes that you're using, and many of them that pair together are missing. Like, you're making less per visit than you have to, because your team isn't adding in the codes, the procedural codes of what you're actually doing. And so I was able to show her, like, here's lost revenue and here's potential revenue if we implement this process. And it was like she went from defensive mode of I'm getting it wrong to like the aha, like, okay, I can do this. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that's the heartbeat of it, is to say, for doctors, yes, you didn't go to school for the business acumen. However, procedurally, as you're doing things, you should be very in tune with what's being billed out, what's being adjusted off, so that you're making, the money that you deserve for what you worked for. So anyways, that would be kind of the learning on both sides.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really important point. The profitability in private practices right now is more challenging. Overhead
It
costs,
is.
staff costs, et cetera, have all gone up.
Yeah,
So we have to be so much more dependent on efficient systems,
correct.
checklists, dialing in on revenue opportunities, not for doing anything more, but just getting paid for the things we're already performing in our practice on a regular basis seems really common sense, and yet we're all really guilty of that. So let's dive into some operational efficiencies for a second. Any when you look at a practice that's performing incredibly well, are there some consistencies that you see? Let's take private practice, for instance, not on the DSO side, but on a private practice, when you walk in and you see a high performing, well performing practice, are there some consistencies that you've observed over time?
Yeah, there are. And I think that it's changing. With the landscape is changing, but some of the consistencies that I see are bonus structures.
Okay.
When a bonus structure is implemented, the team is more inclined to be responsive and doing what they should, because they immediately know what the goal is, right? Like, this is what we're headed after, and here's how we get there. The practices that don't have that at all, when I walk in and don't even know what their monthly goals are, those are really the ones that I noticed that have the greatest disconnects. And then also, from a consistency perspective, it's the doctors that have recognized the fact that if things are efficient in every part of the workflow, and today we'll talk a little bit about even from the cassette side, but the chair side setup of excellence, to know that their time is money. The doctors that are acutely aware that time is money, those are the ones that have really put things in place to make sure that they run on time, and knowing that that is really a huge impact to their production and their ability to have a satisfied patient. So those are the clinics that I see that are just humming and working correctly
Mhm.
together, is because they've set the goals, they have the financial, numbers front and center for everybody, and then they're also very acutely aware of their time.
So let's talk about cassettes. What does that seems like such a nuance, like very granular within a system, but it's probably not just a granular example of how you can improve efficiencies, but it's probably also a great example that you could expand out to every aspect of the dental clinic. So talk to me a little bit about what that means when a doctor chooses to go with cassettes versus packs or other ways to organize instrumentation. What does that mean for efficiency?
Yeah, I think, it's a heartbeat of mine, because it was one of the first things I noticed when I entered into the dental
Okay.
world, was the amount of time that was being spent with setup. And coming from the hospitality industry, even being in, the food service space of that, watching an event set up, everything had a very structured order. There was prep, things were readied, and then it all came out on time. And I noticed right away when I went into the dental practice, like, there's got to be a better way, right? Like, this is taking 20 minutes to set up for a root canal. What are we doing? Like, we could be
Yeah.
making this so much more efficient. And so I began to time study, and really look at, like, okay, these blocks you're putting in for an hour and a half crown, because they would mill the crown in the office with Cerac and all of that. Actually, 30 minutes of the time was just setting up the tray for a crown. And while it seems like a nuance to be, talking about the granular levels of the cassettes, and like, this, is this really necessary? For me, it was the technology of it was a high tech technology component of recognizing that if the cassette was set up and if things were done right, even from that level, the visit would run smoothly, the patient got out on time, the rest of the day didn't fall behind, the doctor was actually able to fit in another appointment or two sometimes with those shifts. And so cassettes for me became this heartbeat in the beginning of the clinic of, this is what we have to do, that is still considered technology. I still consider it technology. technology. When we look at things that don't necessarily mean digital technology, but it's the tech to say, could we do this more effectively and more efficiently so that everybody knew what was going on? And the other piece of that was there was high level turnover. And so now when someone new came in, we had a color coded system that even a new dental assistant knew exactly which cassette to pull, instead of having to go and search through. They had bins, big plastic bins with individually packed instruments. And there would be literally this just like this hub where everybody was digging.
It's me
And this,
bonkers.
yeah, I mean, this wasn't like a single doctor
No,
location.
I get it.
18 ops and 5 dentists. I mean, they were capable of more. And so
Yeah.
I that's where you have to really start to evaluate, you know, what could I do to be better right from the very beginning? And also look at your Google reviews. Most of the time the patients are talking about running behind, or the team was missing something chair side. You can solve those things, right? Like they're not talking about your dentistry. They're talking
Yeah,
about
let them complain about your crown or that you don't take their insurance. Fine.
right.
Those are real reviews.
Yeah, but they're rare. The reviews that really come out are the ones associated with the
efficiencies.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I know a lot of doctors will complain about, oh, cassettes are so expensive. So when we started our practice in 2010, our first one, we bit that bullet right out the gate. We were like, you know what? We really want to have really good systems in place. I want to know what inventory I have. And you know, the other piece that it unlocked for us is that we didn't have to overbuy instruments because we always knew what we had at any given time.
Correct.
And so when we opened our second location, we put the same strategy in place, and then we could keep it together long enough to where we could buy a whole nother set of cassettes to upfit another hygiene chair, because now we were adding another hygienist and we could upfit her with what we needed. But we always knew what we had at any given time. And the other thing that has really helped us with cassette management is that we sharpen our own instruments in the office, and they know, they have them all labeled. So they'll, it's an easy way for them to know which ones have been managed, which ones need to be managed at the next opportune moment. And, you know, they're keeping track of sharp instruments at all times so that but it's easy to track that because it's not pouches, it's not loose instruments here, there, and everywhere that they're piecing together on a daily basis. So it is a big initial investment, but gosh, it pays dividends for years.
And the thing that I think doctors don't realize is the team is playing pass interference, because they're going to the front desk and saying like, hey, you can't overlap these two because we don't have enough instrumentation to turn that over in sterilization. So go ahead and move so-and-so. And many times the doctor has no idea why the patient was moved or why the schedule has a gap in it, but the team has actually instructed them to do so because they don't have what they need.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And Hu-Friedy doesn't want to hear this, but I bought cassettes in 2010 that I'm still using today because, to your point, their technology in your practice, and honestly, they complain the least.
That's right.
You know, I don't have tech support calls on my cassettes. They're just there doing their job every day.
Yeah.
So that investment has paid dividends for us now for 15 years without any hiccup whatsoever. So we wouldn't go back. And I know, you know, the team can open a cassette up. Cassettes are such a sexy topic, right? But they can open a cassette up. They know what's missing immediately. Right. They're like, somebody didn't put the ball burnisher back in, or I'm missing a scaler, or an Explorer broke the last time and they forgot to refill it back in.
Yeah.
It's pretty quick. They know, and they've managed that often before I even get in the room.
Yeah, I also feel like it's such a big associate retention piece that we don't talk about, but how, you know, you said cassettes are sexy. I'm thinking about that associate that comes in, and to immediately sit with them and be like, what instruments do you need for the success of your visits that you do? Now, this is what Dr. So-and-so uses, but let's build yours. Some of the key frustration I see in turnover of associates is they feel like that they're not equipped. They're like, I didn't have the resources I needed to be successful chairside, and I was given the inexperienced assistant. So imagine elevating the inexperienced assistant with a cassette that actually is built by the associate. How much more could they feel valued and honored in that process, right? And now they're performing quality dentistry because no one's searching for the cassette, you know, for the instrument in the back of the office. Yeah. So
that is such a great point. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think those are the intangibles even doctors don't think about. You know, what can we do to equip everybody for success. And it really equips the low-lying fruit of your dental assistants that you're training up as well
Yes.
for success. Everybody's performing much better when we give them systems that are predictable
Yeah.
and somewhat customized to what they need. So I think that's a really great point. I love
Yeah.
that. All right. So what other operational efficiencies do you see? One of the things that we do, and I don't know in your observation what you've seen, but one of the other things that we do in our practice is we have kits for, you were talking about root canals. I don't do root canals. I haven't done a root canal in 15 years. I find them incredibly boring. But let's say I'm cementing a crown. I have 2 crown cementation kits in the office. The team knows where they're located. If they go and pull that kit, it has every cement, every cleaning agent, whatever
Yeah.
is associated with that procedure. How do you feel about custom like carts, procedural kits, that kind of stuff? Are you seeing that perform well in practice or no?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one of the first things I do is to recommend cassettes and cart setup so that
Hmm.
there is the ability to change over and have what you need. And I'm also down to the point of like if they are doing implant placement in the clinic, that they're pre-bagging and pre-setting up that cart that they're ready to go, because all of that, again, time is money. And I had a doc not that long ago said, I'm tired of doing these implants and nobody shows up. And then we have this, entire setup, a sterile room setup of, $50 worth of supplies. And I said, why aren't you taking a deposit for those higher volume procedures? Like that they need to know that there's a lost deposit because of what you have to do for setup. And the doc just hadn't thought about it, right? But he was losing money in that regard. So carts are a huge win, because when you pair that cart with prepackaged elements, dry good elements, and then also have your cassette ready to go, it's wheel in, be ready to move. And it's funny you said that about root canals being boring. So many dentists like want the challenge of that root canal, and I'm like, it's great that you all want to offer that, but make sure you have enough mobile carts that can be placed in each room, one to warm up the gutta percha, and all of those things are on the cart ready to go, because now I'm not begging for another doctor to hand off their materials to me. And like I said, also having the assistants run pass interference and rescheduling people because we don't
Exactly.
have what we need. That happens more than anybody knows. And that is one of the greatest losses of revenue in a clinic, is because we don't have what we need to succeed. Even hygienists having a single piezo to share between ops and being told to, schedule their SRP, we're literally like stopping progress because we haven't invested in the equipment. And so, yes, it's a lot to invest in cassettes. Yes, it's a lot to invest in carts, but the return and the way that it pays for things is so instant. It's almost hard for me to even, from an ROI perspective, it's hard for me to even say to the doctor, like, listen, I don't even want you to like think about this anymore. If this is done in month 1, the ROI is already there. Like you just have to trust.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
I think it's much bigger than they realize.
I 100% agree. And things like Cavitrons and piezos and, ultrasonic, all the things that people need chairside. And if you're looking at your hygiene team and they're picking it up more than 3 times a day, then they can justify that
Yes.
investment in their operatory 100%. And carts have so much value from a inventory management, because I've worked in practices before I opened my own. You could open every op, you have some type of storage system, right? Usually
Yeah.
it's some 12 o'clock system
Right.
or side cart or whatever. There's dead cements. There's cements that haven't been used in years. There's expired stuff
Yeah.
everywhere because it's all spread out and nobody actually knows
Yeah.
what's in the clinic at any given time. So you made the comment that it might be more expensive. And I think sometimes in the initial investment, especially if you're
It
buying
is.
equipment, 100%. But man, it saves you so much on the inventory side when you're not throwing away half-used syringes of cement, because by the time you find it, it's
Yeah.
expired or hard. It's set already. And
And I love if there are multiple docs that they each have their own cart setups, because of
Yeah.
the fact that you could assign per assistant to order for that specific doctor. And again, it's so honoring and so protective of that doctor's method of how they work clinically. But at the same time, because they're only managing their room, right? Their cart, they're more like, it really is. It's like a little kid with their room,
Yeah.
right? Like they're not, they don't want to clean the whole house. They just want to take care of their one room. When you assign that one space, that one cart to that assistant, now they're ordering just for that one doctor, and they're not letting things run out. They're making sure the doctor has the right types of things that they want, the right, like you could even fill those carts with everything you need with composite material specific to that doctor. Making it very closely connected allows you to not have waste. And all the time I go into practices where there's expired material, or like I'm seeing where there's failure of fillings, where they've had to do replacement fillings, and it's very high on their CDT code log of what they did over the last year, and it's because they were using outdated material, or they were down to one curing light, and that curing light was now the taped, battered, and bruised curing light that actually was curing the crown, or curing the filling all the way. And I'm like, guys, these are things you need to address. You need to have them specific to each doctor, and then really create ownership over that material.
Yeah, I think sometimes we're our own worst enemy. Like we focus on, we're hypersensitive on the front end costs of things
Yeah,
like that, like maintaining your right curing lights and checking in on them and stuff, whatever. But we're happy to eat free composite all day long, which
right.
is the most expensive thing we could be doing.
So
Our chair time is
expensive.
so much more valuable than,
Yeah,
you know, checking to make sure your curing light is actually curing composite at any given time. So
correct. Yeah.
I think that's phenomenal. Any other obvious efficiencies that you've noticed, that key takeaways that you could say, man, if you could just do this one thing, you're going to see your team morale improve, your overhead costs will be better, your profitability, production, all that kind of stuff. Any other key takeaways that you can think of?
Yeah, so I hone in right away on adjustments for clinics. And I love that the CDT code structure is built into the Hu-Friedy cassettes, so that you're pairing the right CDT codes with the right placement for the visit. And when I go into a clinic, it's the first thing I look at is what's being done chairside actually going to the ledger? And then is it actually making it to insurance for reimbursement the way that it should? And so if I could give one final piece of advice, it would be to start with your adjustment summary. And if everything's categorized as a write-off, it's time to change that. You need to have different adjustment types so that you can start tracking your inefficiencies. For me, that is the greatest way to figure out if you're treatment planning correctly, if you're missing things chairside and quoting to the patient. And also to identify, write-offs per insurance type, to see if you want to stay in network with those insurance carriers. Many times it's all under write-off, and we don't know what is actually associated with which carrier.
That's
And
right.
it's a great way to identify those things. So that would be my final tip, is follow the money, and don't be so disconnected from the administrative burdens that you're not watching where that money is going, because it really could be some very simple changes that make you a lot more in your practice.
Can you talk a little bit, just for our audience that might not know what you're referencing with the Hu-Friedy
Yeah, yeah.
code check? Can you talk just a little bit more in detail on that and where they could find that type of information?
Yeah, so on the Hu-Friedy website, one of the things that I absolutely love is, in correlation with the ADA's CDT codes that have been built, Hu-Friedy has said, okay, this code structure associated with a crown and pin retention means this is the kind of cassette you would need to fulfill on those things procedurally. So they've taken the code, they've identified the instrumentation type based on a very, solid base of dentists, and they give you an output of the best type of cassette for those procedural codes. And I absolutely love
That's
that,
awesome.
because sometimes we know what we need, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes we're open to some suggestions to make it better. And, there hundreds of cassette choices. And I love that it kind of narrows it down for you and gives you kind of the baseline of what the best cassette types are. And then to take it a step further, now you have this very highly intuitive practice that's thinking about those cassette types and the code types, because right now we're seeing all of those things like grouped together in one big bucket, just like I said about everybody looking in the big bucket for the instruments, but we're doing that. And each procedure deserves a different type of TLC, really, that it's customized, that it's done correctly, and then from there the output is so much better because we're doing it right from the very beginning.
What a huge asset for startups too. If you're a practice that's looking to bring cassettes in because you want more efficiencies, or you're starting from scratch and you have no clue, you know what you used at your previous practice, but building it from scratch from the start
Yeah,
up of what you
yeah,
really want, that's a huge asset
yeah. And
for
even for new
doctors.
dentists, there are new dentists coming into your clinic,
Absolutely.
to give them that catalog to choose and have some guidance is huge, because many times they don't know what they want until they see it. So I love that, from the very beginning, when I started using Hu-Friedy, they handhold you along the way to
Yeah.
make you the most efficient practice possible. And I'm so glad I started with that, because it was such a baseline for me of time studying and looking at efficiency. And they've certainly gotten it right over the years.
Yeah, and things change too.
Yeah.
Like having that as a resource is very advantageous because it's all we can do to keep up with what manufacturers are doing actually to make our lives easier. And we don't even know what's happening. I'm sure there's 1,000 Hu-Friedy customers who will listen to this who say, I have no idea that existed. What,
Yeah.
what an asset. I'm going to go check it out because I need to relook at my systems in my organization. So these manufacturers are super intentional about trying to improve the lives of dentists
Yeah.
because they value you as a customer. And for most of us, it's actually really difficult to keep up. So I love that we're bringing light to the way that companies are investing back in their clients to say, hey, we see the challenges and we're going to lift you up and support you through that process to make practice life maybe slightly easier or at least more predictable, which I think is really, really amazing.
Yeah, the key right now though is doctors have to slow down a little bit, because it's hard to imagine like going in and tackling this as a dentist, because there are so many other things you can be focused on.
Yeah.
And so I would even do some sort of an incentive with a team member that kind of rallies this together, that's highly organized to help you with it. But it is something that continues to pay dividends once it's done. So find a little bit of a slow season. Usually January is a great time to do it, right? Because everybody's, starting to get back in the mode of the day to day, but just carving out time to do it is the key thing right now. And I know it's hard to find time, but it's definitely worth it.
I would love to talk to you a little bit about your role as a COO, the role of an office manager, lead assistant. Like, um, how does that work? You bring up a great point. Doctors want to tackle this. They see the need. They identify that the need needs to happen. Who can be a partner in that journey with them to help support them? Because a lot of times seeing the need and then actually taking it all the way across the finish line, those are two very different things. And doctors are busy and often overwhelmed with a lot of other things they're managing. So any best practices? How do they leverage a COO in that environment, or an OM, or a lead assistant, lead hygienist to sort of help carry the baton a little?
Yeah, I think that you have to look at establishing a small incentive for them to help build the baseline for you. And it doesn't have to be something major, but there has to be an understanding of the why first, right? So
Mhm.
that team member needs to notice and understand, like, okay, this is going to help us with time and availability for the patients, and giving them kind of a full perspective of that. And then really making sure you find the right team member that can rally with you. Because what I find happening the most right now is there's this huge, sorry, the sun just changed in the on there, that there's it's time. I think there's this huge missing element of not identifying the right people for the right task. So one of the first things I do when I go into clinics is I survey the team to understand what their passions and what they love to do are. And many times I will find where the doctor has assigned someone who has absolutely no interest in organization or, pulling of tags or any of that, and they're in charge of it. Like
Right.
you'll But I'm like, are you really organized at home? Like, is that why, this was the right role for you? And they're like, no, like I have no control over my home. It's a mess and I don't want to be doing this. And so like, I feel like we've almost negated where the value and the contributions are that could be happening with team members. So survey them, know what their strengths are. I mean, I love the strength finder tests that are out there, but then find people that can be champions for the right things and incentivize them to do those things. So giving a timeline of when you want it accomplished, what you hope the outcomes will be, and let them run it for you with certain parameters. But I definitely think you've got to have the right person for the right job. And we miss that a lot of the time. Like we end up putting the dental assistant that worked in sterilization at the front desk, and everybody's complaining that they're unhappy and it's a disgruntled environment at the front desk. I'm like, you took the person who worked only with sterilization with no people and you
Right.
put them at your front desk. It's never going to work. So
No.
I think that's a big piece of it, is just find the strengths and leverage those, because there is someone on your team that wants to do this for you, and also probably has been watching the inefficiency for a while. That's like, man, I'm ready. Let's go. Like, give me the keys to drive and I'll drive this thing. And so that to me is really the starting point of it.
Well, and isn't that how we ultimately provide them professional growth? I mean, if we don't find their skills and then provide them opportunity to grow and like really enhance their roles in our practice, they kind of cap out at some point
They
from a
do. Yeah.
salary and, and then they leave you because
Yeah.
they can grow somewhere else. So unlocking that potential within them makes it much easier to give them raises and bonus structures and other things because they've
Right.
demonstrated this new level of competency and
Yeah.
I there's that makes them sticky to your practice. They want to stay.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. Right now, I'm seeing hygienists leaving in droves, and the dentist's like, fine, I'll just do the pro fees and the SRPs myself, because they're so frustrated with this compensation conversation. And what I say to the doctors front and center is like, stop thinking about this as a lump sum of money. Give them a baseline and then say, okay, if you do these things, here is your earning potential. The sky is the limit. It's up to you. Then if they stay after you've made those changes, it's no longer about you giving the next raise every 6 months, or, like I feel like doctors have set up these reviews like every 6 months because that's, what some consultant told them to
Some
do.
guru said many
Yeah,
years ago, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm like, but the problem is like everybody's expectant every time they have a review, they're getting a raise. Like,
Yeah.
so like if you say you're getting a review, the very first thought that any hourly team member has is, oh, I'll probably get a raise. So when you don't get one off of the first 3 or 4 reviews, which again, some consultant somewhere told you to set it up, then that means that like now they're disgruntled because you must not think they're doing a good enough job. I believe that raises shouldn't be something that really is very rarely given, because they're earning their potential with bonuses. So they're always getting a raise. And so I think we've forgotten that. And I know doctors right now are frustrated with the money conversation, but boy, there's so much to win with bonuses and giving them incentives.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you brought that up because I feel equally as frustrated. So I
Yeah.
think it's always good to have a reminder of other opportunities. And again, it always goes back. It's just like with the checklist manifesto and everything else. It's just changing our way of thinking, which is actually the first hardest part, is
It
to
is.
kind of get out of the entrenched, but this is the way it's always been. And my dad was a dentist and his dad was a dentist. And this is the way we've done it for however many years, or I worked at a dental office or my mentor has done it this way. And we definitely are operating in very different, challenging times. And so we have to be more industrial. We have to be more, we have to engage people like you who come from very different backgrounds who can provide us so much valuable information to make us more efficient and more productive. Because I think that's the only way we're going to grow as an industry. There's so much potential, but we're just really kind of stuck. One other thing though, I have to ask, um, the other thing I see though, talking about coming in from different backgrounds, but I've also worked with other DSOs and engaged with them that really don't know anything about dental. And you've
Yeah.
kind of managed to make this marriage between the two and take your operational understandings from a different industry and then apply it. What does that learning curve look like? What did you have to do to become really like a part of like an extra arm of our industry to say, yeah, I'm bringing this to the table, but I got you. I know what you're doing on a daily basis. Cause I still feel a disconnect with a
Yeah.
lot of DSOs. I'm like, you don't actually know what we do
Right.
you?
Right. Yeah, I think that for me, it was just to humble myself and recognize. I actually had a hygienist that didn't know I was standing there on one of my first days working in a clinic. I was behind the scenes, and the hygienist goes, "She's never going to make it. She knows nothing about dental," and like was kind of razzing me. And I actually went up to him a day or two later, and I said, I know you don't think I heard you, but I did. And I said, I'm highly competitive. So that was like game on for me to get this right. And they just kind of laughed. And I'm like, no, really, it was.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of it for me was humbling myself to say, like, I don't know everything, but what I do know how to do based on working with people in hospitality and working with other environments before I entered into this and, into dental is that people are people, right? And across all platforms, they're the same. And if I can learn the way that people interact, the way that this is supposed to happen in dental, the right way, I can take this wherever I go. So I invested in a ton of CE courses. I went to every conference I could find for my first 5 years of doing this. And really just started to say, like, I don't have all the answers, but I'm going to find people that do. I found people that had been in dentistry for 40 plus years that started educating me on things I should know. And I just started retaining as much as I possibly could, because for me, dental is such a unique profession. It is not like any other profession out there. And there's so many finite details. And even when I entered into the DSO space, there is a realization that they're coming from private equity backgrounds without an understanding of what's happening in a single private location. And I really consider it my responsibility now in this phase of my career after 20 plus years now of like, this has got to be something that I invest time in educating and helping them understand, because dentists aren't just dentists who lead and operate to make money for a clinic. And at the end of the day, it's just a check. They really are about the results for the patient and what it means for their life. Like, I've rarely met a dentist that isn't dedicated to the outcome and what that means for the patient, that they're just driven only by money. And so a lot of that bridging of the gap in the DSO space has been to say, this is more than money. This is more than what you spend or what you hope to gain. This is really about creating a path forward where people value what they do for a living. And I feel good when I go home at the end of the day. And I want to see more of that take place for sure.
Well, and they're often members of their community.
Yeah,
So, they're pillars. They're not just accountable chairside to patient care. They're accountable at the grocery store,
that's
or,
right. That's right.
they go to the
Yeah,
school pickup line and like, hey, Joe,
yeah,
and they're
yeah,
like, Doc, loving it, loving it. And you're like,
yeah,
okay, that's great. That's,
yeah.
really
Right.
good. So it is kind of always there in your presence. I have two final follow-up questions. The first, if doctors wanted to pursue education to learn, you did deep dives on your own path. If they want to do more education on that side to they see the leaking sieve in the practice. They want to be more efficient. They want to grow, put the policies and procedures in place to be that more profitable, efficient office. Any suggestions or recommendations that you have?
Yeah, I would just say start taking as many courses on scaling as you can. There are plenty in our industry that do so. I would start reading dental economics as much as I could get my
Yeah.
hands on it, and other resources that are talking about the pulse of where we are and what the things are that overcome it. I would also be less inclined to listen to consultants that are going to give you a bag of tricks that they think are going to work, because ultimately at the end of the day, it's the tried and true tested environment. And many times it's peer to peer. I see even, through like Dental Nachos and other organizations where it's that dentist perspective of an aging dentist that's starting to age out that might be able to contribute some of your best, that value propositions of what you need to change or do. So just getting out there and being curious, curiosity for me is the biggest thing that I educate on with dentists that I partner with, to say, hey, just be curious about what's out there. Start researching it, start asking questions. And then above all else, if you really want to pulse on your practice about what needs to change, go to ChatGPT or Gemini or even Claude and ask it to do an analysis of all the reviews that exist on your clinic out there and to give you feedback about what others are saying about your practice. It's sometimes the eyes you need to be able to know where to focus first. And I love the fact that it even gives you an opportunity to see, ways to improve. Like in Claude, even it will take those reviews and feedback, and it will itemize it based on what has been recommended or stated the most about your practice. So if it's a time study component, that'll show up first, and so on. So that would be my recommendation.
That's a great recommendation. And then lastly, for our listeners and viewers, where can they find you? Where can they learn more about your teachings, hear you speak, and sort of deep dive in your world?
Yeah, so the fractionalmatch.com, or you can find me, it's linkedin.com/Cassie Tallon if you want to connect there as well, but always open to provide feedback, always speaking. And really the reason why I wanted to talk today is because I saw firsthand in the beginning of my career and have seen since then the benefit of things like cassettes as just this benchmark of excellence for practices. So excited to share that. If you want to know more about my journey, even with Hu-Friedy, I'd love to share more. But yeah, they can find me online.
That's so awesome. I know they'll be looking for you. Lots of questions coming your way. I hope we have you back again. It has been an absolute pleasure of mine to spend a little time with you. Hopefully our paths will cross at one of these speaking engagements in the near future. But thanks so much for joining. And thank you again to our educational partner, Hu-Friedy Group, for allowing us to bring these amazing folks to our audience to spend a little time sharing their expertise. Have a great day.
Thank you.
And that wraps up another podcast for Dentists in the Know. On behalf of Dr. Jennifer Bell, Dr. Chad Duplantis, and myself, remember that we've got a great profession, so let's make it a great day, Dinks.